Welcome back to the most accurate podcast here at 4 for 4 Football. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, fresh off an exciting regular season opening week. And joining me as always, none other than the man who is now pulling himself out of the rankings and projections cave. It is John Paulsen. Paulsen, how are you hanging on after week one?
Not a terrible week one. It was some wild stuff happening, but got back into the flow of things and got the rankings out yesterday. I'm also doing rest of season rankings front to back, which is the first time I'm doing it the whole thing. So that was a little bit of an experience yesterday, but those are up as well. So you can find your waiver wire pickups there.
And joining us, as he will every single week for this special usage show and preview, a look-ahead episode every single week, Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern for those watching live, none other than Sam Hoppen. Hoppen, I know you have charts and other notes ready to go for us today as well.
I do. Fortunately, every single data provider changed how they format their data over the offseason, so got to deal with a lot of fun mismatching data. But we are all set to go now. We're ready to rock.
That is a complaint that maybe one person feels sorry for.
Oh, yeah.
No one else gives a damn about that complaint when they're listening on the podcast. And because of that, Sam, I want to get right into the usage because everyone is curious about buy highs, sell lows. Everyone wants us to overreact and react accordingly to week one. And I want to start, gentlemen, with the 49ers running backs because we know if you look at any waiver wire column, even though you should read the one in particular on 4 for 4, everyone who wrote a waiver wire column had to go to Google search and look up an image of Jeff Wilson. He's the cover boy no matter where you go for week one waiver pickups. And Paulsen, I want to start with you on your outlook for Wilson, who, as we know right now, Elijah Mitchell is on IR, expected to be out reportedly 2 months. Remember, San Francisco's bye week is in week 9, so we are expecting Jeff Wilson to be the starter, barring injury, until week 10. And what we saw once Elijah Mitchell left the game was 11 carries for Trey Lance, 10 carries, including all 11 running back touches for Jeff Wilson, and 6 carries for Deebo Samuel. Your thoughts on this backfield moving forward?
Yeah, he's certainly the running back pickup of the week, probably the pickup of the week. And I've got him projected for 16.5 carries, about 2 catches. He's not a huge, receiver there in that offense. I think what we'll probably see though is Deebo's rushing numbers get a little higher than what we would have seen if it was Elijah Mitchell back there. He'll probably be the RB2. Effectively. So I would come out of this feeling really good about having Deebo on my roster. I think he's going to really have a good stretch here with Elijah Mitchell out. But Wilson is the big winner. He's going from the RB2 to RB1 situation, and he's obviously going to have a certain number of touches every week, and it's a pretty good matchup this week against Seattle. So I've got him ranked as a low-end RB2.
Any additional thoughts, Sam, on the 49ers offense, the big picture takeaway from them? Because I actually came away with Deebo Samuel, maybe not as a buy high, since we still have to see George Kittle work into this offense. But remember, when Samuel was used as a wide back in the second half of the season last year, he was averaging less than 5 targets per game. But to still see those wide back carries and see 8 targets and an ambiguous target tree, we all thought that, it's wide open. It could be Brandon Ayuk. It could be George Kittle. Also, what if the answer to an ambiguous outlook is just Deebo Samuel, right? So now we're getting targets and carries. In the short term without George Kittle, if those carry over, I want to be extremely high on Deebo Samuel moving forward. But your thoughts on the 49ers offense?
I would agree. And it is difficult to take a ton away from this game because it was a monsoon here in Chicago. They didn't have Kittle, and they had Trey Lance when, Jimmy Garoppolo was starting all of last year. So I think a lot of people, fading Deebo in the offseason were expecting Lance to get more of the rushing usage and potentially take that away from Deebo so that San Francisco could keep him healthy throughout the year. Now, that probably changed when Elijah Mitchell went down and they didn't really have anyone else other than Jeff Wilson. And the fact that Jordan Mason and Tyrion Davis-Price were basically no-shows in this game makes it a little bit confusing. So I lean yes, that Debo is probably a buy high because it looks like his usage is not going to change that much regardless of the situation.
And with Jordan Mason and Tyrion Davis-Price, fine, minimum waiver pickups. But I also think people are overreacting and thinking that's where these touches go. These touches do not go there. They go to Jeff Wilson. And remember, this is also a different offense than last year. We've now seen Trey Lance have 12, 12, and 13 carries in his 3 career starts for the Niners. So it's actually quite log jammed, which is what makes me think that Wilson will have fewer than the 18 carries per game Mitchell averaged in the 12 starts he completed last year. But also, we still expect him to get 15 plus touches, which is why, Paulsen, you have him ranked as your running back 26, a RB2 weekly for the time being. I also, Paulsen, want to talk about the Chargers wide receivers. Our own injury doctor, Adam Hutchinson, projects Keenan Allen to return in week 5. So with this soft tissue hamstring injury, we already are under the assumption he won't play in the short turnaround, an amazing matchup against the Chiefs in week 2 on Thursday night. And then we think we could also get Josh Palmer, DeAndre Carter, Gerald Everett for this opportunity that's now vacated for a handful of games, not just on Thursday. So how are you playing out this situation?
Yeah, and it was this week, or it was last week, it was really Carter that was the one that emerged with Allen sidelined. He ended up with 3 for 64 and a touchdown on 4 targets. Palmer had 4 targets as well, caught 3 for just 5 yards. And then at the tight end position, we also had Donald Parham was out. So I was a little bit bullish on Gerald Everett already. And then now with Allen out, Everett looks like a pretty good streamer. Threat for low end tight end 1 numbers every week. He had 3 for 54 and a touchdown on 4 targets. But this was and then also you have Mike Williams, 2 for 10 on 4 targets. So this was, nobody on this team got more than 4 targets. And there was like 6 of them, 7 of them that got 4 targets. It was kind of a weird target distribution for Justin Herbert, but he really spread the ball around. And for that reason, I wonder if anybody's going to be really reliable. I would think that Mike Williams would have to get more usage after his season last year and the contract that he's got. And, Palmer was the preseason darling, looked good. He's got some good quickness and good athleticism. But weirdly, it was Carter, that's kind of stepped into the Allen role. So I think you really, if you're starting Carter or Palmer, you're sort of doing so on hope. Palmer, we have a little bit of more maybe trust or faith in because of the preseason and kind of the way things were trending. But I think Mike Williams is kind of a must start now. Not that he wasn't before, but with Allen out, I would think he's a must start. And I think Everett is looking like a pretty good streamer at tight end.
Palmer also still 75% of snaps. And although, as you mentioned, DeAndre Carter out-targeted him 4-2 once Keenan Allen left the field in week 1. Palmer still, we recall his lone start in place of Keenan Allen last year when he had a 22.5% target share and recorded 566 and 1 through the air receiving. Sam, is there any hope for a bounce back here for Mike Williams? We know the highest target share on the Chargers as they came out spreading the ball out was 11.5%. We think Mike Williams does still have an extremely high ceiling, especially without Keenan Allen. But are there any usage notes you may have that project for that on Thursday?
So Mike Williams ran a route on 86% of the team's dropbacks. No other receiver was above 70%. Now, maybe that changes if Allen stays healthy for the entire game. So he's on the field when they're passing the ball, which is the big part of it. Without Keenan Allen, I think he'll definitely get more run. The interesting thing was Mike Williams only had 14 air yards in this game. So at a 3.5 average depth of target, which is not what we typically expect from Mike Williams. We sort of see him as that deep threat, but it could be that his profile is changing and does change with Keenan Allen, their possession receiver, out. I lean with Paulsen here that Mike Williams is a must start. If you're really desperate in deep leagues, I would start Palmer over Carter. Carter did see the 1 end zone target that Herbert threw and caught it for a touchdown, but Palmer was the second highest on the team in terms of receivers in routes run at 25. So Mike Williams, and then a very big tier, and then Palmer, and then Carter for me.
And it may not be as safe as playing Jeff Wilson, but if you asked me in a vacuum who I would flex, I would still chase the ceiling of Josh Palmer permanently in this matchup that is combined for over 50 points the last 3 times the Chiefs and Chargers have played one another. Paulsen, another conundrum that happened on waiver wires is what to do with Rex Burkhead. What we know on Wednesday is that Lovie Smith came out and said, we need to get Dameon Pierce more touches. That's what we need to do, which is oddly on him. And what we saw in week 1 was Rex Burkhead befuddlingly running 29 routes to Pierce's 5 and out snapping Pierce 11-1 on 3rd and 4th down. What are you doing with Rex Burkhead and Dameon Pierce, both in the short and long term?
Well, I did notice in the preseason, and I don't remember who the beat writer was, but they were saying that he was saying that I think people are just misunderstanding the level of faith the team has in Rex Burkhead. Mm-hmm. And it's just like this irrational love and faith for him within the organization. So the fact that they're coming out and saying that we need to get Pierce more touches is a little bit of a departure from that. I mean, I think the beat writer was suggesting that Pierce's workload just wasn't going to be there as what we were expecting. I mean, he was going earlier and earlier in drafts, and I saw him go in the 3rd or 4th round, and it was kind of befuddling to me for a number of reasons. But and Burkhead was one of them. But I don't think that his passing game role just goes away. Burkhead, he's a good receiving back. He's always been a good receiving back. I think the argument might be, okay, why is he getting 14 carries and Pierce is getting 11? That should be flipped, or even, more like a 15 to 17 for Pierce and maybe a 7 or 8 for Burkhead. And that's maybe what their ultimate goal will be. But right now, I don't have any faith in starting Pierce. I got to see a significant workload here, and words don't really matter at this point when Burkhead sees 19 touches last week in a game that they were leading most of the way. That's a game that sets up for Pierce to see a lot of carries. You would expect this sort of workload from Burkhead in a game that they're trailing all the time, which is what they're likely going to be doing most of the season. So I have him. I moved Pierce down in the rest of the season, but still holding a candle out for him, or lighting a candle for him and holding on to him, hoping to see a turnaround in terms of his touches.
I am holding Pierce as well, Sam. Is this a situation where you would sell if someone is offering a lucrative package, even though I don't think that's happening after his usage from week 1? Or what are you doing right now with this backfield yourself?
I'm also holding Dameon Pierce. He only played 20 snaps, but he did get 12 total opportunities in the game. So that's a pretty high share of, ratio of opportunities to snaps. So if his snap share rises, I would expect his opportunities to rise with it. Rex Burkhead is clearly the passing back. I think we sort of knew that entering the season. He played on 87.5% of the team's 3rd down snaps in the game on, on Sunday. And like Paulsen pointed out, it was a game script that set up for Dameon Pierce, their supposed leading rusher. So I'm holding Pierce. I'm also adding Burkhead because I do think the Texans play in a lot more negative game scripts and keeps him involved in the passing game.
I want to kick it back to you, Paulsen, for your thoughts on Darrell Henderson and what we saw on Thursday night. There were rumblings behind the scenes that Sean McVay had soured on Cam Akers before the game. And then what we saw suggests that Darrell Henderson is a touch-based RB1, low-end RB1, fringe RB1 for as long as he is healthy. And I have question marks about that last caveat. But your thoughts on Darrell Henderson right now for everyone who is the RB16 in your week 2 rankings?
Yeah, and he when I originally ran the rankings and projections and kind of assigned him RB1 touches, he came in the top 6. So there's a lot of upside here with him, and there's also a little bit of danger if they decide they want to go back to Cam Akers. Cam Akers didn't do anything in the game to indicate that he needed more touches. I mean, he carried the ball 3 times for 0 yards, didn't see a target. He played 18% of the snaps. Darrell Henderson played 82% of the snaps. So if I have Darrell Henderson right now, I'm very likely starting him. It looks like he is the clear RB1 right now in that offense, and I think it's going to take a lot of work for Akers to sort of get that any sort of significant usage back, unless he starts to show something in practice that we're not privy to. This was, I mean, I think we all came in thinking with what McVay said, that we have an RB1A and 1-2, we have 2 starters, blah, 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 that we were going to see some sort of every other series rotation between these two. And what we saw instead was bell cow usage for Darrell Henderson, who we know from last year delivers like low end RB1 numbers when he's the bell cow in this offense. So I would confidently start him. I would look for him in DFS. I think it's he's a strong start this week.
You say Akers did nothing, but he blew a pass block. He got in there and pissed McVay off more, so he certainly got in there. But we know that staying healthy is a skill, and that's why I hold Akers just as a contingency option, strictly as a stash option, because we know that skill and staying healthy is not what Henderson has ever shown us going back to Memphis since he's battled chronic ankle injury in that time. So what are you doing right now with Henderson, with Akers, yourself, Sam?
I hate to keep agreeing, but I'm agreeing here. Henderson was one of 6 running backs who played on every one of their team's red zone snaps in week 1. He played on all 6 of them. So the fact that he's getting usage that close to the goal line as well is massive. I do think, to your point, Daigle, Akers is worth holding on as bad as he was. Henderson has dealt with injuries in the past. So there is an opportunity that if Henderson gets hurt, they don't really have anyone else to give touches to. So he's a hold for me if you need the roster spot. I don't think holding on to Akers is something you necessarily need to do, but if you have the bench space, for sure hold on to him. And Darrell Henderson, especially against the Falcons defense this week, is a smash start for me.
I would confidently start him over Jeff Wilson if someone has that decision that is listening. I'm also going to put the onus on you, Sam, to explain what happened with Allen Robinson and how people should be feeling right now heading into week 2. He is Paulsen's, for reference, wide receiver 32 ahead of Sunday.
I mean, that was one of the biggest questions coming out of week 1, especially out of Thursday night. And it was super confusing. He did run a route on 98% of dropbacks. So that's, I think, what a lot of Allen Robinson managers are holding on to right now. He only got the 2 targets, but that Bills defense was so good. They were shutting down, almost everything aside from Cooper Kupp. And the fact that, it was at the very end of the game, but Robinson did get an end zone target as well. So he's someone, again, against a very bad Falcons defense, if you're in a pinch, is probably more of a flex option right now than a wide receiver 2. So you might have better options available, but he's not someone I'm dropping by any means. The Rams are one of the pass happiest teams in the NFL, and Matthew Stafford is for sure the best quarterback that Robinson has played with in his career. So I think Robinson could be a buy low opportunity. And if someone drafted him in the 3rd, 4th round, the cost might not be as high as you might think.
My only concern for the short-term Paulsen would be that Robinson played 75% of his snaps from the boundary, and AJ Terrell, just going back to week 1, logged 80% of his routes from the boundary. Terrell, of course, who allowed a league low among all starting cornerbacks last year in yards per catch. Now, Terrell got spiked for 2 touchdowns on Michael Thomas, but we're also questioning if Allen Robinson has it in his bag to still have the profile, have the explosiveness that Michael Thomas, he showed he has. So what are your thoughts on the Rams passing attack moving forward?
I think it's not hugely surprising that he struggled against the Bills. I mean, the Bills are really good defense. I haven't looked at the numbers, but I assume they played a lot of zone, and that Cooper Kupp tends to really eat against zone. Looking at reception perception, Allen Robinson's in the red against zone. He's 75%, but not as high as a lot of it's not even average in terms of his success rate versus zone. So first game with Matthew Stafford, certainly alarming when you're, looking at him drafted as a wide receiver 2, going in the 4th round, sometimes the late 3rd, that you're getting this sort of week 1 production from him. I might bench him if I have a better option, but I'm certainly not cutting him at this point. I do think that if you are a believer, and Matt Harmon certainly is, he charted Robinson last year and thought that a change of scenery would do him good. He still got it. And this is a offense, and the reason we were drafting him, in the 4th round, this is an offense that saw really good production out of the wide receiver 2 spot last year with Robert Woods and Odell Beckham, both producing fantasy wide receiver 2 numbers in that role. So I think he's going to have a bounce back. I don't know if it'll be this week. I'm hoping for him and his managers that have him rostered, but it's certainly it's setting up as a better situation against Atlanta than it was against Buffalo. And I think, they look at, all I heard out of the preseason was how much Sean McVay loved Allen Robinson. He was apparently turning on tape for people just unsolicited. Nobody's even asking about him. He's like, I got this Allen Robinson tape I want to show you. So apparently they really love him. So I think they probably come out of that game knowing that they got to get more out of him. And I would expect that to start in week 2. I don't have him ranked terribly high this week because I'm kind of in a wait and see mode with him. There's some other players that, Christian Kirk, Julio Jones, Darnell Mooney against the Packers, who I know is going to see a lot of targets. I feel a little more comfortable starting them over Allen Robinson this week, but it's not a bad matchup. But as you mentioned, the perimeter cornerbacks for the Falcons are actually pretty good.
Paulsen gave some examples, Sam, but I'm curious your thoughts. If Keenan Allen was ruled out for Thursday, would you start Josh Palmer or Allen Robinson? Because some people have to make that decision.
That's really
and it's
tough
very
one.
Close. It's very close in the rankings, by the way.
It's extremely close. I probably lean Robinson. I think there are other potential outlets or more potential outlets in the Chargers offense, whether it's DeAndre Carter or Gerald Everett, Austin Eckler as well, than there might be in the Rams offense outside of Cooper Kupp. So it is extremely close, but I'm going to go Robinson here.
Everyone who is listening is curious what to do with this Cowboys offense after Dak Prescott was ruled out for at least 4 weeks. Jerry Jones, ever the optimist he is, seems like he'll return him. And then I start worrying if Dak Prescott is just Russell Wilson in the second half of last year, which is what I think would happen. But for me, I look at this offense, no Zach Martin heading into the season. Tyron Smith lost for at least 4 months during the preseason. Left guard, Connor McGovern, who was only playing there because the Cowboys have a developmental rookie left tackle, removed with an injury on the first drive of Sunday night against the Bucs. Now they have sophomore 7th rounder Matt Farniok, who struggled during the preseason, starting for them, and Cooper Rush, who stepped in immediately for Dak Prescott, of course, pressured on 35% of his dropbacks to close the game and ate the 3rd highest sack rate of any quarterback in week 1 because he's a backup quarterback playing behind a 3rd-string offensive line. My argument now is that this is a college offense. Like, this team is an absolute disaster, and that's why that's why I think Michael Gallup in very shallow leagues. There are people in 10-team leagues, shallow benches. I think Michael Gallup can be dropped. Right now, the report is Michael Gallup is just getting involved, perhaps in team drills midweek, may not even play in week 2. And so Lamb, in my opinion, is a player who I would look to trade to anyone who lazily thinks it's an overreaction because of his 11 targets, when I would argue those 11 targets were inefficient and will only get worse with Cooper Rush and a 3rd-string offensive line. Sam, what are you doing with the Cowboys offense? Are you buying high, selling low with any of these players in particular?
That's an interesting way of putting it. I mean, you could point to the 11 targets that he had. He only had 2 catches, which is, I mean, just a terrible rate. I'm writing up my Hoppen to Conclusions article, quick plug there, will be out later today. But one of the primary benefits of the Cowboys offense is how quickly that they play. They run a play every 27.7 seconds in neutral script situations. But in the one game that they played without Dak last year, that dropped nearly 5 seconds to 32.2 seconds per play. So the team just gets very sluggish without Dak Prescott under center. I do think if you have Lamb, you can start him because he is the alpha in that offense. I think, even though Cooper Rush is throwing, he's going to, I think, catch more than 2 balls if he gets 11 targets again. But outside of that, I mean, if you drafted Zeke, you likely have to start him, but I don't know if there's really anyone else in this offense that I want to be touching if Dak isn't going to be playing for a stretch of time. So if you can sell high on them, I think that is an opportunity that you should take advantage of, because while Jerry Jones thinks that Dak is going to return in 5 or 6 weeks, Schefter is reporting that it could be closer to 8. And we know when Russell Wilson came back from his hand injury last year, he just did not look the same.
Paulsen, you have CeeDee Lamb. You've already taken a stand, ranked as your wide receiver 25, thus a wide receiver 3, fringe wide receiver 2. Your thoughts on this offense in the short term and what you're doing in leagues? Are you trading? Are you standing?
Well, it sounds like Dak isn't going to be out that long, maybe as long as we were originally thinking. I'm seeing 4 to 6 weeks. And then you have to look at Cooper Rush as a fill-in and how bad is it? And I think for a player like CeeDee Lamb, it's taking him from a wide receiver 1 type player to a wide receiver 2/3 type player. So he's probably somebody you're still going to start because he's going to see the targets and the usage. And the question is, you alluded to it. You actually discussed it. The offensive line, how bad is it going to be? They were sacked 4 times against the Bucs. On one hand, I sort of give the Dallas offense a little bit of a pass against the Bucs. They have one of the best defenses in the league. They're not going to play the Bucs every week. Specifically this week, the Bengals not as good of a defense. And then just looking at Cooper Rush, in the last 2 seasons, he's appeared in 5 games. He's completed 37 of 60 passes for 62%, 61.7% for 486 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, averaging 8.1 yards per attempt, which is very good. And his favorite targets were Mari Cooper with 13, Lamb with 10, Schultz with 9, and Ezekiel Elliott with 7. So just wanted to mention those numbers. If he can come in and be decent, we can get through this stretch with Lamb as, hopefully you have some depth at receiver and can, bench him in bad matchups or something if you need to, but you're probably still going to start him. He's probably still going to see 9, 10 plus targets. And I don't think Rush is a complete disaster at quarterback. I think the question is, can they protect him? And that offensive line is probably the big issue right now.
Can they protect him when he has the white in his eyes when he looks up and it's Dennis Houston as his wide receiver 2, as opposed to last year, everyone cites that spot start he had against Minnesota when it was Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, and CeeDee Lamb. Completely different offense with the first string offensive line. This is not that same unit. That is my big argument and big takeaway. An NFL offense should be able to reach the team's opposing 30-yard line. The Cowboys couldn't do that in week 1. It's an absolute disaster. I also, Paulsen, want to ask you about the 7th circle of hell and Taysom Hill, because he is throwing off projections, because no one has ever had to project for a tight end who rushes for yards, a tight end who takes snaps under center inside the 10-yard line. It is a very confusing situation. As I wrote in my waiver column, it's person to person. It's case by case. We can't even answer if you should start Taysom Hill over X player, because that comes down to your own risk averseness. You have to look at your third eye, turn it inward, and say, what kind of human being am I in this life? And so that's why it's really hard to discuss Taysom Hill. But I know you have a few stats you want to discuss about Hill.
Yeah, so this is obviously a common question this week. We have a little bit of an issue at 4for4 because we have never had to project rush yards for a tight end. I think we had one issue pop up and it was Aaron Hernandez years ago, and he's since since gone.
Right. Yeah.
Sorry to laugh about that, but it was a long time ago. Was the joke there? I'm meeting with Josh to try to figure out like a short-term solution or some sort of solution for Taysom Hill. It wasn't so bad when he was quarterback because we could project rush yards for quarterback, but he's no longer listed as a quarterback. So I pulled the 17 games that Hill's snap percentage was within 5% either way of the 26% that he played in week 1. So I'm looking at a range of 21 to 31%, assuming that the Saints want to continue to use him in the way that they've used him in week 1. In those games, he averaged 3.7 touches for 27.89 yards and 0.41 touchdowns. That's, rushing and receiving. In half PPR, that equates to about 6 points per game, which would have made him the tight end 24 last year. So that's what you're sort of looking at with this sort of playing time on average. Obviously, everybody's talking about this because he had 80 yards rushing, ripped off a long rush, 50-something yarder, and he had a touchdown. So everybody's like, how can I, work Taysom Hill into my lineup as a tight end? Is he going to break the tight end position? Probably not. I mean, I think if you look at those range of games, he averaged 7 yards per carry in those games. So that's good. And he saw 3 carries per game in those games. He saw 4 in week 1. So if let's say they do the same thing and they run him 4 times, you're looking at probably 28 rushing yards or about there, and maybe 0.32 rushing touchdowns if they bring him in around the goal line. That would equate to roughly 6.9 points per game, and those are mid-range tight end 2 numbers. So that's how I would sort of value him right now, in between the mid-range tight end 2 to low-end tight end 2. You're going to have some good games, and you're going to have some really bad games. If he comes in and rushes twice for 4 yards and is only running, I think he ran 3 routes, got targeted
4.
once.
Don't take away one of his 4 routes. It was 4.
4 routes. Okay.
Yeah.
So like they're not using him as, as a runner and then also using him as a tight end, like a primary tight end. Juwan Johnson ran 33 routes. So I would expect more consistent production from Johnson, which was kind of a surprise. I think we were looking at Adam Troutman perhaps, with half those routes, but looks like they really like Juwan Johnson as their primary tight end receiving. So what I'm getting at is you might get this kind of game where you get a 50, 60 yard in rushing plus a touchdown out of Taysom Hill, but you might have some really bad games from him as well. He only scored 8.2 fantasy points or higher, which is the threshold I use for tight end 1 numbers, starting tight end numbers, in 6 of the 17 games. So you're really in a 1 out of 3 situation. And this, with these sort of snaps and this sort of usage, of getting tight end 1 numbers out of him. So I think most fantasy managers want more consistency, but he is kind of a fun player to start. And if they do decide to use him as a passer at all, or they start expanding his snaps so he's on the field more and maybe running 5-6 times instead of 4 or 3, then we can seriously start talking about him as a starting tight end, fantasy tight end. But right now you're looking at him as sort of a backup streamer type, given the way he's being used in this offense.
It's volatile is in fact the correct answer and assumption. My only hangups when I think about it are Alvin Kamara and this rib injury, because they didn't say that Kamara's over the rib injury. They said he's dealing with a rib injury. Thus, if it continues to happen, well, is Taysom Hill still again used inside the red zone as a rusher? And also Taysom Hill snaps and routes. Like Taysom Hill isn't out there running 4 routes to tight end. Taysom Hill is out there because he was schemed 4 routes in a play designed for him. That's my only issue when I see his carries and snaps at quarterback. It's because he's supposed to get the ball on those routes. Unlike if another tight end were to run 20, 25 routes on 50 dropbacks. So it's a hang up when I think about tight end 2s, but it is easier to argue for him in half PPR leagues where you don't receive bonuses for tight ends. Whereas, FFPC, all like that, where you get 1.5 points, you get additional bonuses for tight ends catching receptions. It's easier to take the Evan Ingrams of the world, the Cole Kmets of the world in that case over him. Sam, I want to come to you for the Chiefs backfield because what we saw was a muddled situation. Now, we do know that in the first quarter, before the Chiefs built their 3-score lead in the second half, Clyde Edwards-Helaire out-touched Jerick McKinnon 7-1. Isaiah Pacheco was not involved to that point. in the second quarter when the Chiefs had a 14-0 lead. CEH got 2 touches, McKinnon got 3, and Pacheco got 2. Only when they reached the fourth quarter with a 30-point lead did Pacheco handle 10 carries to McKinnon's 2, and CEH wasn't used at all because it was positive game script and a blowout by that point. What are you doing with the Chiefs' backfield moving forward?
So I think Pacheco could be a sell high here. Now, it's a risky proposition to sell high on any player in the Chiefs offense. Ronald Jones is for sure out of the picture. It looks like he can be dropped in every single league if people still have him. I think Jerick McKinnon is who I'd potentially be buying low on. He played 62.5% of the team's third down snaps. So he looks to be sort of the passing downs guy, and still played on about 32% of the team's red zone snaps as well. Didn't get nearly as many carries as CEH or Pacheco, but you laid it out really well that Pacheco did not get involved in this game until it was such a big lead for the Chiefs. And it was probably, an extended preseason action type thing for Pacheco, and in that they want to see what they have. But CEH played pretty well for a guy who a lot of people buried as being just a terrible running back this offseason, and had the nice nifty little catch from Mahomes' underhand throw near the goal line, which I think is huge. So CEH, I'm for sure holding right now. Pacheco, if you're desperate, can be a sell high, and McKinnon I'd buy low.
This certainly helps me be higher on CEH Paulsen. Not only did we not see him, handle carries inside the 10-yard line, but we saw him play 2 third down snaps as a receiving back in the money zone. And that's what matters to me, is that he was out there. Doesn't matter if he gets carries, as long as he's the running back they always use because they get bored inside the 10-yard line, that's seeing targets. So your thoughts both in the short term and long term about the Chiefs backfield?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny to see him finish with 7 carries in a game, I don't know, that they won pretty handily. Mm-hmm. He came out and was really involved in the first drive. Looks like he had 4 carries, had another 4 touches in the rest of the first quarter. So he ended up with like 8 or 9 touches in the first quarter. Wasn't that involved in the second quarter. And then as the game got out of hand, they basically sat him down. I think the question here is Pacheco versus McKinnon, and who is the proper handcuff or injury upside play. And I think if you do see an Edwards-Helaire injury, you're probably going to see some sort of committee between those two, with McKinnon probably getting first crack because he was playing ahead of Edwards-Helaire late last year. He's a better runner than people give him credit for. He's obviously a really good receiver. So I think Pacheco probably takes a back seat unless he really explodes in whatever touches he gets in that scenario. So I think that's the kind of the question that we're asking, because if you have Edwards-Helaire right now, you're, might start him, you might not, just depending on the matchup, but week 1 certainly encouraging. And as Sam mentioned, I think Ronald Jones is sort of out of the picture, just kind of depth right now. If there's an injury, then maybe he'll be active on game day. But it looks like he's going to be a healthy scratch if not. And
although I would take a package for Pacheco right now, Sam, if someone sees his 12 carries and overthinks it in my league, but also there's a chance he just plays over McKinnon by outperforming him, because we saw in those 12 carries, 4 went for 5+ yards. Like, he is a very explosive running back, and maybe that allows him to earn more opportunity down the stretch. That would be my only thing I'm monitoring here.
I do think Pacheco is probably the long-term play if you've got some strong running backs already and can potentially wait for a second half breakout. I think Pacheco is the right move. But if you're looking for a spot start at running back right now, I would lean McKinnon.
Everyone that overdrafted Ramondre Stevenson Paulsen is now curious what happens since Ty Montgomery got moved to IR, expected to miss the next 4 games. We don't know who they're going to activate or call up from the practice squad in his stead. Maybe JJ Taylor, maybe Pierre Strong. But overall, how do you view this Patriots backfield against the Steelers and long-term?
I would, I just want to throw in McKinnon is average over 5 yards per carry since coming to Kansas City. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yep.
So he does have some upside. Ty Montgomery played 37%. If you look at our running back by committee report on the website, which is really handy when I want to try to dig into these backfields, but Ty Montgomery played 37% of the snaps in week 1. He only had 5 touches, but 4 targets. So we know what his role was. He was kind of the James White wannabe in that offense. And the fact that he's out, I think they're not going to look for a third player to do that. I think they're just going to split that work between Harris and Stevenson. Harris isn't bad at catching the ball. We've heard a lot about Stevenson this preseason. Heading into the year, we know he can run the ball. We know he can catch it. So I think it's a bump for both players, and it does sort of open the door for Stevenson especially to make some plays in the passing game and make some wow plays, because he does have that ability to really get trucking upfield, break a couple tackles, and maybe break one. So I think bottom line, you're seeing a big bump in snaps for both players. I mean, you have 37% of the snaps to divvy up. It's 21 snaps, another 10 snaps for Harris, and another 10 snaps for Stevenson. They're going to do something with those snaps. And obviously these are high yield, snaps. I mean, you're looking for using them as a pass receiver, obviously point per reception leagues. They benefit even more in those leagues. So, anytime you have your running backs running routes, it's good. So I would look at this as a boon for Harris and for Stevenson, almost equally, but Stevenson, I think, gets a bit more playing time than, probably gets a bigger bump in playing time than Harris does.
Agree. And the fact Damian Harris ran 11 routes to Stevenson's 4, and as evidenced of last year as the preferred goal line back, that's why I'm still high on Harris. But then, Sam, we also have to ask, how many touchdowns is a Matt Patricia offense really going to score at year's end? So what are your thoughts on this backfield?
I think I would probably sit both if I had better options. I mean, I'd for sure start Darrell Henderson or Jeff Wilson over both of these guys, 2 players we've talked about already on the show. The offense just does not look great, and Miami's defense is solid, but the concerns about the Patriots offense this offseason and them sort of switching to this Shanahan type running scheme, it just did not really work. It sounds like Mac Jones is practicing, so he should play, which if they had to change quarterbacks, that would be a massive downgrade, I think, as well. But if for some reason I have both of these guys on my roster, I would lean Harris. He did get a little bit more work in the in the passing game, like you mentioned, got 2 of the 3 red zone snaps that the Patriots had in week 1. But my hope is just that they filter this Ty Montgomery work to both of these guys, and they don't bring in someone else to take a bunch of the workload. But it's the Patriots, and we know that they've always been a headache for for fantasy purposes.
For reference, Damian Harris is a low-end RB2, and Ramondre Stevenson is the RB30 in Paulsen's week 2 rankings. Are you moving on to Cordarrelle Patterson, Paulsen? Because everyone will have an opportunity to sell high if they choose to do so. Your words are crucial. You're telling them what to do. What are you doing with Patterson after we saw 25 touches and 83% of the team's backfield touches, which were the highest he's accumulated in his time with the Falcons dating back to last year even?
Yeah, this kind of warmed my heart, because all offseason I was trying to figure out why Patterson was going so late in drafts.
Right.
I mean, you could get him 9th, 10th round pretty easily. You could get him in every draft you wanted to in the 8th round, basically. And I sort of get it. And I think the fantasy community on one hand is just ageist, and it's just age discrimination against some of these older players. But Patterson was really good last year. Obviously had a breakout year, but he's 32 years old. So I think people are, kind of worried about his durability. And I think if he sees this workload for very long, he may not hold up for very long. But I think in the short term, you want to be starting him. Damian Williams went out with a rib injury, but Patterson saw the first carry in this game. So he did get the quote unquote start, or at least got the first touch for running back. and they do have some holes at receiver, so he's going to see a lot of work in the receiving game as well. And Tyler Algier was a healthy scratch, so he's not really a factor. That was the guy that I think the fantasy community was thinking was going to come in and take Patterson's workload, but he wasn't even active. So he may be active now because, Damian Williams might be sidelined. But I think the Atlanta, I tweeted it out. I did a picture of the Atlanta depth chart. It was unofficial depth chart from their website, and Algier was listed as the 8th running back, and there was nobody in the 5-6 spot. I don't even know what is going on there, but it doesn't bode well. They usually won't do that to their starter. So obviously he's not the starter. Patterson, I'm just going to plug him in and just hope that he can stay healthy as long as possible. But, he's not built for 22 carries or whatever he had in this game. 22 carries, 3 catches, 25 touches. I don't think he's going to hold up for very long. So it's not a bad idea if he's depth for you, because he might be. If you draft him as your RB4 or something, if you can get a nice haul, I don't see him lasting the entire season with this sort of workload. But I think in the short term, he's going to be a really good start.
At least we did get confirmation that Damian Williams is the contingency back to roster there, since he did have those 2 touches on 7 snaps in the first drive and a half. And then Patterson took over from there. Tyler Algier, not only inactive, as you said, but also inactive behind Avery Williams, a 5th-round special teams running back who we know will be active to play on that unit over him every single week. So Algier needs Williams basically to be injured in order to be active on Sundays. Thus, we are not high on him at all. Sam, what are you doing with Cordarrelle Patterson, since this is potentially the highest selling point he'll have all year?
I mean, I don't necessarily see it that way. If you think his body's going to break down because he's a little bit older, then sure, this is an opportunity right for you to sell high. But one of the, I guess, again, big shockers with the Atlanta offense, or I guess why Patterson was going so low, is it's really just Pitts in London and then nobody else really. And the question entering the season, I think, was, well, is the offense going to be even good enough to support a third player? And we saw against I think is a decent Saints defense, them doing pretty well. I mean, they put up 26 or 27 points. Avery Williams, I do think, is an interesting deep stash if the Falcons are really that soured on Algier, because Williams ran a route on 45.9% of routes, which is not an insignificant amount. Patterson only ran 2 more routes than him. So it's one of those things where a couple of things might need to happen, but someone to at least keep on your radar going forward.
From one backfield to the next, I want to discuss the Jets running backs, because what we saw was both Michael Carter and Breece Hall used heavily. Sam, we have a chart here for all those who join us again at 1 p.m. Eastern every Wednesday. Go ahead and dive into what you saw through the Jets backfield usage.
Yeah, so when the Jets initially announced Flacco as the week 1 starter over Mike White, I was a little disappointed because White peppered the running backs with targets in the couple of games that he played last year. Turns out Joe Flacco just is going to do the exact same thing. He gave them, 10 and 9 targets for Hall and Carter, respectively. The Jets had the second most high-value touches with 13 in week 1 for their running backs. So in the passing game, their numbers were pretty identical. What separates them and what really stood out to me is Carter dominated the third down snap percentage, 70.6% to 23.5% for Hall. He also dominated in the red zone, commanding 61.5% of the red zone snaps to 38.5% for Breece Hall. So that sort of stuff leads me to believe that Carter is still the 1A in this offense, but maybe the timetable moves up for Breece Hall when a lot of people thought, the reports just a week or two ago were that Hall was clearly behind Carter. And I think while Joe Flacco is starting, they both have some flex appeal, especially if they're going to be getting this many targets and high value opportunities as well.
And that many touches or targets, Paulsen, and a timeshare is enticing for Breece Hall. But as Sam said, an out-snapping Hall 14-4 on third down, and also Michael Carter handling 65% of running back touches in this game, I think Michael Carter's the player we should be very happy with if we got in rounds 10 through 12.
Yeah, he's another one of these guys that, was being drafted as an RB2 and is actually the RB1. And they did tell us, and they showed us in preseason that Carter was ahead of Hall, but a lot of us didn't believe him. But heading into the season here, we were in a pretty good situation with Carter, Darrell Henderson, Patterson's another one. I'm sure there's a few more, or maybe there's another one to discuss at some other point in the future. But I think the situation here is Hall's sort of a hold. You're hoping that he can emerge, but what they like about Carter is that he hits the hole faster. He's more decisive, and they're feeding him the ball for that reason. He's also a pretty good receiver. So I just don't think that they're going to be able to maintain 19 targets per game for these running backs. So I do expect these numbers to decline a little bit as they try to get the ball to Elijah Moore a little bit more. But certainly Carter, it looks like a solid flex at this point.
Are you trying to tell me Joe Flacco's not going to throw the ball 59 times? Is that what you're trying to tell all of us?
Yeah, I mean, it was funny because I did tweet out some numbers from his start last year and how, he really jibed with Moore. And somebody responded that, Flacco peppers running backs with targets too. He didn't in that game. Obviously, Ray Rice, Baltimore, was a big pass catcher out of the backfield for Flacco. So, yeah, 59 pass attempts, but 19 of them. I mean, what is that number? It's like a third of his targets are going to the running backs. That seems unsustainable.
It was the Broncos still who led the league in rate of targets to running backs, and Javonte Williams soaked up 12 out of nowhere. I also want to talk about, Sam, the Bills' backfield, because what we saw was essentially a timeshare with Zach Moss handling 12 touches to Devin Singletary's 10 on Thursday night in the regular season opener. What do you have for us among the Bills players?
So this was a mess and a shock to everyone as we were watching the game. Singletary comes out, he's the lead back, and then the next guy that they bring in is Zach Moss, and he's getting peppered with targets, had 6 on the game for a 19.4% target share, caught all 6 of them, but he only ran a route on 37% of the team's dropbacks, and Singletary was actually up at 47.5%. Then they bring out James Cook, and he fumbles on the first play that he's in, or gets a carry at least, and it seems like he's sort of in the doghouse for the rest of the game, only plays 3 snaps total, and was having a conversation with some people afterwards about who this is best for. And with Moss fumbling as well, I think Singletary is, sort of the best guy for this offense going forward. And it's something where I don't think you can really trust Zach Moss's performance from this past week to really carry forward. The Bills looked like they were trying to get the ball out of Allen's hands really quickly in this game. His average depth of target was quite low for a Josh Allen offense. And I think that passing game work probably goes to James Cook in the future, but it's not something that's going to be immediate. James Cook, more of a hold for me. Devin Singletary, I think you can start because he is a great running back and one of the best offenses in the league. And Zach Moss is possibly a sell high if you can point to the targets, point someone else to the targets and work it out that way.
I know you took to the Discord, Paulsen, following Thursday night for your In the Box channel, which you put stats in throughout the weekend. What did you take away from this Bills backfield performance?
I didn't write about it a whole lot. I think the interesting thing here was that, I mean, the thing that kind of threw everybody was that James Cook fumbled and basically doesn't play anymore in the game. So I don't know if Zach Moss took those snaps from Cook, if there was a plan for Cook, and he basically got benched. He scored negative 1.8 points per in PPR formats.
Yeah.
But I think, looking long term here, we knew that, I mean, Moss was playing more than we kind of thought even before that happened. And it does look like he's the primary backup right now. If there is an injury to Singletary, you're probably going to see Moss in a pretty big role. So I think you could, use that as a selling point too. But I don't know, like too many. I mean, I think Moss is more of a waiver wire player right now than somebody that you're trying to trade. And whether or not you want to pick him up is kind of based on your running back depth. But I think he is an injury upside play when we kind of thought that Cook was. And I wouldn't be shocked if Cook stays in the doghouse for a while, and they seem to like what Moss is bringing them right now. And they said that in the preseason that he was doing well in camp and was kind of taking a next step from kind of a disappointing season last year. So that's how I look at it. I mean, I think he could be a weekly flex in a good situation. And certainly if Singletary were to miss time, then Moss becomes RB2, RB3 type.
I will just note that Singletary was drafted in shallower leagues because he averaged 18 touches and 86% of Buffalo's backfield touches in his last 7 games last year. So Thursday night, and Moss handling 52% and Singletary dipping to 43%. It's not the fact that Singletary's overall backfield touches got cut in half. It's the fact that at least Thursday night was a true timeshare. And that's why I will be monitoring this situation closely. Moving on to wide receivers. Everyone is curious, Sam, takeaways from the Titans, since they essentially used 4 players, but we saw 2 people among their group stand out in particular. What are your thoughts on Titans wide receivers moving forward?
So I had been off Robert Woods all offseason. I will continue to be. He led the team in routes, but only had 2 targets. Meanwhile, their rookie wide receiver, who they drafted to replace A.J. Brown, he only ran a route on 38% of dropbacks, which isn't great, but still led the team in air yard share with 34.1% of the team's air yards, had 5 targets in the game as well as an end zone target. The surprise here, I think, is Kyle Phillips, who led all receivers in targets with 9. That's good for a 29% target share. So Kyle Phillips, certainly someone to pick up off the waiver wire if he is out there and you're struggling for some wide receiver depth. But Burks, I think right now is a hold and has a great ceiling moving forward. And Robert Woods, someone that I will continue to be out on the rest of the year.
Paulsen, your takeaways. How are you treating this wide receiver group in the short term, knowing people have Robert Woods, Treylon Burks, and will run to waiver wires to pick up Kyle Phillips, who I wrote about in depth at my waiver wire column on 4for4?
Yeah, and I would also just, I mean, we're probably going to talk about tight ends here in a minute, but Austin Hooper ran the second most routes after Robert Woods. Both Woods and Hooper had disappointing games given their preseason buzz, at least in camp. And I wonder, if Woods is going to take a few weeks to kind of get fully healthy from that knee. I know I don't think he's wearing a brace and has been, practicing fully. But the fact that he didn't do anything in this game really of note is a little bit alarming. I'm not out on him. I would just, I don't think anybody was starting him this week or wanted to start. I mean, I'm sure somebody was starting him, but probably don't want to start him now. Maybe just bench him and kind of sit and wait. Because I do think that he's a more proven receiver than Burks. He's the most proven receiver on this team. So I'd like to see and not panic after 1 week and, sort of see him in a 2 to 3 week span to see if things start to improve. I do think Phillips in PPR formats has some appeal. There was a great buzz about him in camp, and for him to come out and have a pretty good game in week 1 kind of supported that. And I think his snaps and stuff are only going to rise. He ran the second most routes amongst receivers, tied with Nick Westbrook. So, and then Burks is way down at 14, but did draw some targets in those in that snap share. So he's probably the one with the most upside. Burks. Phillips is kind of reminds me of a Cole Beasley type. It's going to maybe get you 10 points in a PPR format and a spot start, but is not going to light the world on fire. So he'll probably be ranked wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, with a pretty good target share, but not a lot of upside. And I would say that from a season long standpoint, Burks still has the most upside, but I am sort of monitoring Woods. I don't think I would cut him at this point.
Pro Football Focus's Nathan Yonke also noted that Kyle Phillips registered the league's highest target per route run rate, 43% of any receiver to run at least 20 routes on Sunday. We also know that Robert Woods stayed into run block on 16 of his 30 passing snaps, whereas Kyle Phillips only ran blocked on 6 of his 25 passing snaps. So when Kyle Phillips is out there, he's essentially running routes. Again, my mother would be discouraged by how much fab I put on Kyle Phillips in FFPC leagues. It is terrifying, but I'm very high on him. People will also have, Hoppen, a choice between Curtis Samuel and Jahan Dotson across waiver wires this week. Dotson, of course, only 5 targets, but 2 touchdowns. And like we saw in the preseason, the second most routes on the team. Curtis Samuel, we didn't know that leading the team in target share was in his range of outcomes, but to also see 4 carries, encouraging, in my opinion, for a high weekly floor. Your thoughts on this offense?
So I think you don't really see this in the target share between Samuel, Dotson, and McLaurin. They combined for 20 targets, but this wide receiver group is going to be very concentrated, I think, between those 3. All 3 of them ran a route on more than 75% of the team's dropbacks. No other wide receiver was above 10%. So when they are rolling 3 wide receiver sets out, it is those 3 guys and those 3 guys only. Curtis Samuel, clearly the possession guy, had a 1-yard average depth of target on 11 air yards and 11 targets. Dotson with the 2 end zone targets as well, and McLaurin with 1 end zone target. Not to sort of forget about him, because I do think he still is the wide receiver 1 and can play sort of multiple roles in that offense, whether it's inside or in the slot or outside. Dotson, though, seems like he might be more of a deep threat as well, had a 13.6 yard average depth of target. So to decide between Samuel and Dotson is, I think, it's difficult for sure, but people were burying them because of Carson Wentz. It looks like that might not be the case, especially if it is this concentrated. If you're looking for PPR upside, I think Samuel is the way to go, but Dotson for sure looks like the real deal and has an opportunity to secure a ton more touchdowns.
And it's only 1 week, Paulsen, but the Commanders did average the 8th highest pass play rate in neutral game script. So we do think there's a chance that all 3 can return value wherever they return value in rankings. But that's why I want to come to you, because now you could also argue Terry McLaurin has the most competition of his entire career. So where do you stand on these 3 receivers in the short term, knowing people have choices to make and starting them?
Well, I think that looking at the targets from 1 week can be it's valuable on one hand, but it's also can be really misleading, because I don't think you're going to see Curtis Samuel with double-digit targets with any sort of consistency, or even 8+ with any sort of consistency. So I think these targets will even out. I think McLaurin will end up getting his share, and Dotson will get hit. I still value Dotson over Samuel because of just the snaps aren't going to be a big difference based on what Sam is saying. And I'm looking at the routes run, and they're very close between Dotson and Samuel. I mean, I think Dotson ran 4 more routes than Samuel did. So there's a lot of 3 receiver sets, and Samuel's going to be on the field a lot. And they do hand on the ball too. He got 4 carries for 17 yards, sort of that Carolina production that we were used to seeing from him. So Curtis Samuel is a player I liked. I liked him, especially at his value heading into get him basically for free at the end of your draft. And he's a player that we can certainly start looking at as a starter, especially in PPR formats. Depth of target's not there. He does have huge speed. They could run him down if they wanted to take a couple deep shots. But I do think that Dotson is ahead of him in terms of the pecking order, and likely will finish with more targets than him at the end of the season. if both players stay healthy. And I think Samuel, you have the injury concern a little bit more than you do with the rookie Dotson. So I'm still in on McLaurin. He did sort of have the touchdown, which saved his fantasy day, 2 for 58 and a touchdown on 4 targets. A little bit alarming, but not red siren type alarm with McLaurin. So I would go Dotson over Samuel, but Samuel's value is obviously higher than it was a week ago.
When everyone tuned in to Monday Night Football, Sam, they not only saw Geno Smith light the world on fire somehow, but also Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy share a 16.5% target share, although it was Jeudy who got there with over 100 yards and a touchdown, due in part to his 71 yards after the catch and big touchdown before the half. So what are your thoughts on the Broncos receivers moving forward?
I put this in the show notes just to tell all of the Broncos receiver managers for those 2 players is to relax. Like, I think the Broncos certainly ran a lot more 2 tight end sets than people were expecting for sure. But both Sutton and Jeudy ran a route on over 90% of the team's dropbacks. Sutton seems like the downfield guy with a 17.3 yard average depth of target. Jeudy down at 10.4, which is pretty solid as well. But I don't think, similar to the Jets situation we were just talking about, I don't think Russell Wilson specifically is going to keep peppering these running backs with so many targets in these games. People were wondering where Sutton was partway through the second quarter and then started to get targeted a little bit more. But Sutton did get 2 of the 5 end zone targets for the Broncos. So holding these guys, starting them for sure, and am encouraged by the usage despite the outcomes that they had on Monday night.
There's also some unwarranted concern about Albert O after Monday night, Paulsen. How are you handling Albert O moving forward?
That's interesting you said that, because I was actually sort of encouraged by the fundamentals. Looking at his routes, he was up there in terms of at his position, but 35 routes. I think that was the 8th most amongst tight ends this week. He was the 3rd most routes behind Sutton and Jeudy. I think the alarming thing for me was I had to like double check Sam's air yards numbers, but his like average air yard or his total air yards is like 4. So on 6 targets, that is incredibly low, especially when
you can get fullback Andrew Beck involved downfield instead. You got to do it.
I mean, Albert O has 4.49 speed, and we're not even targeting him once down the seam. It's questionable. So I was actually fairly encouraged by it. I have him in a couple of leagues, and I started him. And obviously the numbers aren't great, but 5 for 33. But getting 6 targets is good, and the routes were good. So I think the fundamentals were fairly strong for Albert O. We'll see how long that lasts. If they want to get Greg Dulcich back and get him involved, but that's going to be a few weeks. So I think Albert O has an opportunity here. He did catch a long pass in the preseason, so they know he can do it. I would like to see more air yards for him and more downfield targets for him.
Another tight end that will close out your charts with Sam that everyone seems to be concerned about is David Njoku. And maybe that's because Kevin Stefanski came out on Monday and complimented Njoku's pass blocking, which is never a good thing for fantasy when you are the best pass blocking tight end on your own team. What are your takeaways for Njoku in this Browns tight ends room?
That is shocking to hear. I did miss that, but I say it's shocking because Njoku was still running a route on 72% of the team's dropbacks, nearly doubled the amount of routes that Harrison Bryant ran, but Bryant with 4 targets on the game, with Njoku only earning 1. So I think if you're in a tight end streaming situation, I would still lean Njoku. I think he still has the slightly higher ceiling, but I mean, in a DFS dart throw type of situation, I don't, you could probably play either of these guys. It's good that it's just these 2 guys and not Austin Hooper as well, like it was last year. But I don't think there's as much concern for Njoku right now. If this continues where he's not getting targeted, then it is, but he's on the field a lot, it seems like, and that's really key for me, especially at the tight end position and someone who's a little further down the rankings.
Any takeaways before we move on and close the show, Paulsen, from Njoku, maybe Donovan Peoples-Jones, who did have a 30+% target share, although we question the accuracy of those targets from Jacoby Brissett. Any other thoughts for the Browns?
Yeah, there's some weird, players getting huge target shares in week one. And I guess that's typically the case, but this is, we got Robbie Anderson on the other side with 8 targets, DJ Moore with just 6, Peoples-Jones with 11, Mari Cooper with 6. So just some weird numbers. I wouldn't read too much into it unless this becomes a 2 to 3 week sort of stretch. With regard to Njoku and Bryant, you mentioned Albert O, and I feel better about his breakout season right now than I do Njoku's, just given the way this sort of shaped out. And I think that Brissett is actually tight end friendly, but he might be tight end friendly to Bryant for some reason, and not looking Njoku's way. Another great athlete, which should be used downfield, Njoku, and right now it does not seem like Njoku breakout season is on.
I want to finish with some quick hitting topics, since it is our job to set people up for success as early as Wednesday, even though there's a lot to shake out, which is why start sits answering those are just impossible on a Wednesday. So let's say, Paulsen, Ken Walker returns. It looks like he's in line 2 in week 2. How are you handling this backfield and Rashad Penny in particular?
Well, I still think Penny will be the lead back. It does add a layer of uncertainty when projecting, not knowing how they will treat Walker with respect to Penny. But Penny, was so good at the end of last year. And I think Bob Condata, the beat writer, said that he's the far and away clear RB1, would expect 20 touches per game for him. I don't think we'll see necessarily that, but it does seem like he's well ahead of Walker right now, especially Walker coming off of an injury, rookie. He can't just jump right in. He's missed some time. So we'll see what sort of workload he has in week 2 if he's able to play. I think in the short term, September, middle October, Penny's still a relatively safe leader of that backfield.
T. Higgins is still in the concussion protocol. We are not sure if he's going to clear in time for kickoff. Where would you value Tyler Boyd, Sam, if T. Higgins is not available?
I think he, probably moves up to high-end wide receiver 3 territory right now. The Bengals ran an absurd amount of rates in their game this last week. That's obviously inflated by the overtime, but I think, they still really like Tyler Boyd. And if T. Higgins is not playing, then I'd be starting Tyler Boyd as a solid flex option.
Tyler Boyd, Paulsen, right now is your wide receiver 30. Does he move up, or is that under the assumption that T. Higgins may not play?
That's under the assumption that Higgins may not play. And I did see our Fantasy Life app. I did see which does a great job of notifying us on breaking news. Definitely go and download that Fantasy Life app. Did say
Company
that
man.
Higgins did. It's also just a good product. Higgins did pass some things that he needed to pass and is making some progress, so he might be able to play. But I think Boyd at 30 is reasonable. I would probably have him a little higher. He did have 4 for 33 and a touchdown, but he saw 7 targets. Mike Thomas saw 5 targets and only caught 1. And then I think the other player that benefits is Hayden Hurst, 8 targets. 5 for 46, actually looked really good. He had a really good catch on the sideline where Burrow overthrew him and he was able to get his feet down. He was wide open and Burrow threw it 10 feet high, and he got his toe tapped and got it in. So he's a very interesting player. I think even long term, even as the number 4 option in this offense, they are going to throw the ball quite a bit, and Burrow's a pretty good quarterback. So Hayden Hurst is somebody that's probably on some waiver wires. Interesting streamer, especially this week if Higgins is at all limited.
Reminder, Tyler Boyd, 28% target share in the first month of the season when T. Higgins was banged up last year as well. Sam, George Pickens ran a route on 91% of dropbacks in week 1, but still finished third in targets behind Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool, not to mention Pat Freiermuth being involved for 10 targets as well. How are you handling George Pickens in the short term, since anyone can just say hold him?
Well, I guess I can't say hold him then. Now that you said I can't say hold him, I'm struggling to figure out the answer here.
No, it's just that everyone, everyone, of course, wants to hold the rookie they drafted in high draft capital. That's the automatic assumption. The question is, people in deeper leagues will have issues or will have question marks about whether to start him or not, and I don't think he's startable personally.
I don't think so either. The fact that he did finish behind Claypool, right? The fact that he finished behind Claypool in targets. Claypool, interesting enough, also had 6 carries in the game, so it sort of seems like the Steelers are trying to turn him into Deebo Samuel, for better or worse. So the usage, again, being on the field is encouraging. If it was down to 35%, I'd be much more concerned, but he is on the field. I do think the sort of success that the Steelers had on offense this past week is a little bit of an aberration. I mean, their box score looks a little better because they were set up with some solid field position on the interceptions they had on Joe Burrow. So, yes, he is a hold. I'm not starting him really anywhere right now and think there are better options out there.
And finally, Paulsen, Chris Godwin, week to week moving forward. How are you approaching these wide receivers in the short term, thinking that Godwin will miss at least a couple games?
Mike Evans is like a must start, obviously, wide receiver 1. I think Julio is the number 2 option there right now until Gage is able to get it going. Julio has it going right now with Tom Brady, and all the video I saw of him in practice, he looked fast, and I guess he was the fastest clocked player at Bucs practice. I also wanted to mention Chase Claypool had the highest miles per hour tracked last week on his 12-yard rush, which I thought was interesting. As Sam mentioned, the 6 carries adds a little bit of value to him as well. So I think Julio is definitely startable right now. He's a good player as long as he's healthy, and hopefully he doesn't injure his hamstring anytime soon.
Leonard Fournette also 75% of backfield touches, 21 carries to Rachaad White's 6 carries, and those 6 carries came in the fourth quarter when the game was already out of hand. Sam, tell everyone what they can. Go ahead.
I just want to mention Rachaad White, though. We know he's the backup there. We there might have been some Giovanni Bernard as the backup. You definitely want, if White's available on the waiver wire, pick him up and stash him.
Absolutely. He is ranked in the contingency top 10 that I keep in the waiver wire column and shuffle weekly based on usage accordingly. He's very high on that list. Just a hint. Sam, what else do you have for everyone for the rest of the week?
Like I mentioned earlier, Hopping to Conclusions will be coming out later today. I've got a buy low, sell high article coming out tomorrow, and then just more and more charts on the Twitter feed all week long. We've got plenty of tools for you to use as well that I believe all of the data kinks have been worked out to this point. So check out the Player Stat Explorer, the Team Stat Explorer on 4for4.
Those damn data providers. Paulsen, what do you have for everyone as we close out the week?
Well, I'm writing sneaky starts today, trying to figure out the Taysom Hill conundrum on the website. And tomorrow I'll be doing probably an hour chat in AMA and Discord. And if you're a 4for4 subscriber and you're not in our Discord, you're missing out. That's where I post my thinking inside the box with all those stats there. There's a ton of interaction with the other 4for4 subscribers who will help you if the analysts don't. And sometimes the analysts will check in and help as well. We can't answer everybody's specific questions, but during the AMA, I try to. And then on Friday, we'll do it back with Anthony Stalter for the Storylines pod on Friday morning.
Waiver wire column also up on the site that I write to be used throughout the entire week with notes for however deep or shallow your league may be. Paulsen, as he said, will be back on Friday. I will be back with the fantasy recap show with our friends at Underdog Sunday night live and Monday morning in your podcast feeds. But until then, just remember, be a little bit kinder than what's required. We'll see you then.